Welcome to My Big Safety Challenge, a podcast all about stories of safety leadership, presented by Dale Carnegie and the Board of Certified Safety Professionals.
There's one thing I want to pull on a little bit, and I think the audience would really value from your perspective on this. You know, one of your and my favorite scientists, Dr. Andrew Huberman, Stanford University, neurobiologist, ophthalmologist, he says that controlling the mind with the mind is almost impossible, but controlling the mind through the body is actually very simple. And people, they see someone like you, especially when they see you on stage, and he's just so natural. He's just so confident. He's just so composed. He's just so calm. And then we hear about things like intention and gratitude, hugely powerful. I know you practice this. Merle does. I do as well. But tell us a little bit about what is Dr. Andrew Huberman actually referencing there, because we want to be to a place in a state of calm and alert and focused so we can deliver for our people, for our teams, in any scenario, whether in front of one person or 1,000 people.
Yeah. You know, David Eagleman, the neuroscientist, to cite another, said that, the mind is translating the story the body is telling it. And, Tony Robbins says motion creates emotion. And as you think about these various principles, through the science of now and in the last 10 years, what we've been able to discover in neuroscience has eclipsed everything we previously knew. With our now capacity to study it, the use of AI to understand more and more and be able to replicate the way in which the mind is working or start to come close to simulating it. But essentially, again, the mind and the body they're one. Where do we feel anxiety? In the gut. Where do we feel love? In the heart. Like, we don't just have these phrases because they're nothing. This has to do with the neural pathways, the nerve endings, the way in which we were designed. Human beings were designed to feel before we think. That's how we survived. We feel faster than we can think. So again, to my logical people out there, you wouldn't be alive if you thought faster than you feel, right? And so Joe Navarro talks about this. Everything we've developed for millions and millions of years is to keep us from getting eaten by cats. And so what does that mean? Well, the body reacts to stimulus and danger or circumstances or surroundings faster than we can think, and then the mind translates that story to process and decide what to do next. But that means that when, for example, when we're nervous, we'll start breathing heavy, faster, right? Well, when we start breathing faster, that tells the brain we're supposed to be nervous. And so there's this beautiful symbiotic relationship that's taking place. And so by just some intentionality of slowing our breathing, for example, it starts to tell the mind a different story. Amy Cuddy did some somewhat controversial, but I think once again was founded research at MIT about the extraordinary impact of just shifting our posture for 90 seconds and, holding what I think she referred to as a power pose. And this idea that testosterone levels, which elicit confidence, the sense of confidence and feeling good, and feeling powerful, will rise. Cortisol levels, which are our stress hormone, they'll drop when we hold a power pose, shoulders back, chest out, chin high, for just 90 seconds. And so, one of the things that I do from stage and that I work with all leaders on is developing their leadership mantra. And it's an I am statement, they are statement. So, before I came on this podcast today, I got really anchored in mine. And it's not exactly how I teach it. Mine's, I guess, what I would say is evolved in that I've been doing it for, 12 years now. But I said, before I came into this podcast, I said, I am kindness, wisdom, love, and patience. And these people are brilliant and courageous in the perfect place in their lives for our paths to cross. They're worthy. I'm worthy. Today is the day, and now is the time. This is my little prayer, my mantra before I step on stage, before I come forth into any environment that I want to bring the best version of me to. And that's a version of me that I've learned that I can really count on. Now, that's not to suggest that I'm always those things, by the way. In fact, that mantra exists because I'm not naturally always those things. But I know those things exist within me, so I want to summon them and bring them to the table. And when I do that, I like to match it with the physiology of the person who would come from that place. And so the deep breaths, putting myself in an upright, not a cocky or arrogant way of being, just one that would, frankly, what's really interesting about confidence, by the way, guys, is what we deem confident body language, standing wide open, chest out, chin high, arms, out to the sides. What's really fascinating about that is that that's also the most vulnerable position you can stand in as a human being, with all your vital organs exposed. And I think that there's a beautiful metaphor in there that what we experience as confidence is actually the ultimate vulnerability. The willingness to be hurt, but the trust that you won't. It's a really beautiful thing. So anyhow, the mind is translating that story. And so when we stand that way, when we breathe and we take intentionality to our breathing, and then we get really clear about the language that we're speaking to ourselves, we alter and shift our state. And our state becomes the lens through which we're experiencing the world around us, right? It tints the lens. When we're angry, hungry, frustrated, we see the same issues very differently than when we're patient and kind and loving.
So, Keith, tell us a little bit about, it was very early on in this conversation, you referenced some identity and then some beliefs. Tell us a little bit about maybe some of your rubs with how traditional corporate leadership training, why that doesn't really get to some of the root challenges and frustrations and causes that we have. And then tell us how you've applied that in your life to move from a plumber to a world-renowned and sought-after keynote speaker and leadership coach and trainer. Tell us a little bit about that. And what I'm getting at is identity. I think we'd really value from hearing your perspective there.
Well, maybe I can real-time this for you a little bit, okay? Because when you just said world-renowned speaker and coach, my internal voice said, no, I'm not. So you just gave a perfect example, and I can now, in real time, share. Now, that wasn't a conscious thought. That happened before I had the chance to stop it. Right? And then what do I want to do? I want to verify. Is there any truth to that? I guess I'm known in a few places. Does that make me renowned? I don't think so I don't have an identity that matches that description. Not currently. And so what does this mean? It's not good. It's not bad. It just is, right? The most powerful compulsion known to humankind is to remain consistent with one's own identity, right? Our underlying belief about who we are and who we're not, the I ams and I am nots of our lives. And I firmly believe this, by the way. I know nothing. This is just, these are my beliefs. I think that's an important distinction.
When he says that, though,
yeah.
Although your mind says, could that be true?
Well, it didn't say, could that be true? It said, it's not. I said, no, I'm not,
okay.
Was what my mind said before I even, yeah.
When he says that, though, does that give you something to strive for, to live up to? Is that good, bad?
It's maybe. That's an interesting question. There's certainly something to be said for the aspirational use of speaking of ourselves as a future state in a present tense. Okay? So there's definitely something to be said for that. It may not be my best coaching because it's not necessarily my style. But I'm not as goal-oriented as I once was. And again, I don't know if that's good or bad or what, as far as this isn't the most important thing. I just seized on it because it was like a real-time example of how the identity works. Because the identity is going to argue with people's opinions of us in both directions when they say it to us, because we're going to argue. So somebody might say, hey, I'd really love, you can think about a lot of our safety professionals might be, for example, a little bit more introverted, or, they may naturally have personalities where they're more data driven and don't necessarily like to be up on stage and talking. And somebody might say, hey, I'd love you to give a presentation on, the great work that you've done keeping the workforce safe this year. And immediately in their mind, they have a thought, well, I'm not a presenter, right? So that's what I mean, how the identity works underneath the surface. It immediately reminds us, tells us our story to keep us in line. And what I mean by keep us in line is keep us alive. So, between the ages of 0 and 8, 80 to 90% of our character and personality are fully formed, right? And the only argument typically that comes up with that is whether it's 80 or 90%. And with that, the premise being that we developed all of these beliefs about ourselves, these identity monikers, based on the feedback of the world around us between the ages of 0 and 8. The things our parents told us that we were and weren't, the things that life told us we were and weren't, our classmates, our teachers, our priests, our rabbis, our, atheists, whoever was in our life that was helping form our belief system. They were showing us a belief system that became our fish tank, right? Like we just came to understand, okay, this is my world, and it's the only world. We don't question that stuff, right? I mean, our prefrontal cortexes won't be fully developed and formed till the age of 25. But here we are at age 8 deciding who we are and who we're going to be for the rest of our lives. And we're not doing it consciously. We're doing it based on the feedback the world is giving us. And we develop a whole set of I ams and I am nots. And, Eckhart Tolle talks about this, that human beings, we exist within our belief system the way a fish lives in water, with no awareness that it's wet. And that's exactly how our beliefs about ourselves and the world around us exist. We don't see them as beliefs. We don't wonder where they came from. And that's why the great philosopher Socrates said, that the unexamined life is not worth living. Because the idea is that we actually do the work, the whole first half of our life or first years of our life are developed. My buddy Brad Caspear says this, they come about where we're building up who it is we're supposed to be. And I think that, the way he says it, the rest of our life is spent breaking that down so we can get back to being who we were meant to be. And so that identity becomes formed as a protective means to make it in the world and to be accepted in the tribe. Because if we don't, right, evolutionarily, if we don't get acceptance from the tribe, if we don't figure out how to bring value to the tribe, we get kicked out of the tribe, we die. And so it's really important to us to figure out the I ams and the I am nots, develop our role, know our place, and stay in our lane. And of course, some of those are really serving. Some of the affirmational I ams are really, affirmative I ams are really serving. A lot of them are really limiting.
One of the principles Carnegie says is give a person a fine reputation to live up to. That sounds like that's in the same track of what you're talking about here, that it could be misused if you do it selfishly, but if we can see something somebody else cannot see and give them that reputation, people tend to think that in their mindset.
So it's so powerful. And, Cialdini talks about this as a point of influence. I heard Adam Grant reference this, recently as a way of speaking with people when it comes to employees. I forget the exact phrase, but it was something around the lines of being able to have a conversation with somebody and saying, look, I have really high standards around this, and I know that you're capable of, or that, that you're the person that's going to be able to deliver on those, right? And that idea, and of course it has to be genuine, but, the way that I look at this is human beings experience life through language, right? In order to have a human experience, we have to attach language to it. And you can do your best to argue this, but I would ask you to try to argue it without language, right? There is no version of the experience of life that we don't put labels to in some capacity. We put meaning to that which occurs, that which is. So the thing is, once we label something, we give it a job to do, right? So if you label that a door, it now has a job, which is to open and close, right? Once it fails to open and close, what kind of a door does it become?
Broken door.
Broken door.
A dud door.
There you go. Perfect. I like that. Because we do the exact same thing with people. Okay? And once they don't live up to our expectation, they become a broken or a dud version of what they were supposed to be. When we label something, we give it a job to do. All people get to be is as we choose to see them.
We see things not as they are. We see them as we are. Someone has said that, a quote.
Yeah.
That we tend to interpret people not just from our vantage point and our grid of life. So, Keith, this is really, how does a safety professional that's listening to this say, yeah, this is spot on? How do they incorporate this into the work that they're doing with people?
This is where I think the mantra comes heavily into play, right? So you start with your own mantra, which is I just encourage people to write down a list of attributes that are true about them, that are not always true, but that can be and have been true about them in the best version of them as a leader. So they may say things like kind, capable, loving, confident. I don't think confident. I think confidence is overrated, by the way. Courage is the courage precedes confidence. And I think courage is where it's at. But if you want confident, go for confident. If not, consider substituting courageous. Brilliant, honoring, inspired. Be wary of inspiring. Just worry about being inspired. So you pick 3 of these attributes and you create your I am mantra. I am a compassionate, committed, courageous leader. Right? Doesn't have to be alliterative. I think my brain just likes to work that way in honor of my English teacher father. So you pick your 3 attributes and you create your I am statement as a leader or as a safety professional or as a father or as a husband or as a wife or as a mother or daughter, whatever you want. By the way, you'll find that they almost always show up very similarly. The best attributes in you for one are typically the best attributes for another, but not always, right? I mean, if you're going to go into battle, you don't want to be kind and compassionate, right? Courageous, yes, but sometimes we need different versions of us for the job at hand. But then you develop the second portion of the mantra that I work with people on, and that's the they are statement. These people are. And again, you're going to choose 3 attributes, but you're going to choose 3 of their finest attributes that are true about them no matter what. And so, for example, I said about, you in this audience, these people are courageous and brilliant, right? Well, I believe that to be absolutely true. You can't survive in this life without being incredibly courageous. Everybody faces fear and still does something anyway. And that's what courage is, to be afraid and still do it. I believe everybody to be brilliant, not from an IQ standpoint. That's dumb. Don't confuse this. That's not what we're saying here. People are brilliant in thousands, millions of different ways. My job is to see them as such so I can call that forward in them. One of the things that I sometimes have been maybe criticized for is that I use a substantive vocabulary. Well, yeah, because I'm not going to speak in a way that's disingenuous. I see people as brilliant, and I know that even if they don't necessarily have familiarity with the word, they can feel what I'm saying. And people get to, as a result, they get to experience what it is to be seen as and spoken to as brilliant. I'm not speaking over people, I'm speaking with them. And so anyway, the I am, they are statement, right? So then the they are, same thing, list the attributes of your people that are true about them no matter what, right? So, and if you're struggling with finding words that are complimentary or positive or, beautiful about people, again, there's 2 questions. Does it honor and does it serve them? And so when we're building that they are statement, consider really authoring it in a way that honors and serves. And if you're struggling at all, you could just use the word worthy of, and then everything that you say about them gets to be true if that's your belief, right? These people are worthy of compassion, abundance, and success, right? Or well-being, or health and happiness, right? All these different variations, and you get to see them as they are. Johann Goethe was a German philosopher. He said, see a man as he is, he remains that which he is. See a man as he ought to be and could be, he becomes that which he ought to be and could be. And, my my dad was the person that, most significantly affected me in this way. My dad was an English teacher in the Arlington public school system for 35 years, all right? And in 35 years, this man never complained about a student, okay? Now, 7th grade public school students, okay? These are the worst people on earth, all right?
Those junior hires.
Yes. And my
Yes.
dad never complained about a single one of his students. And I got to experience this over the years and even reap the rewards of it. When I was 17 years old, I went to play Arlington Legion baseball. And I would play alongside a lot of his former students, which could be daunting for some kids, right? You're going to play, if they didn't have a good experience with the teacher, you're going to, get the wrath of that. But not for me. 4th game of the season, Tommy Walsh, our star third baseman, tells me a story. He says he was talking to his girlfriend, Eileen Leahy, a former student of Dad's. And she said, hey, Tommy, what do you think of the new kid, Keith? And he was like, oh, I like him. He seems like a pretty good guy. And she said, yeah, I like him too. And Tommy looked at her quizzically and said, have you even met him? And she said, no, but he's Mr. Mercurio's son. So he must be a great guy. All right, now, 35 years, never complained about a student. But here's what's wild. My dad, I would meet students that had my father as a teacher who got C's and D's in his class and still said he was their favorite teacher. Because my dad never dropped his standards. And I think this is the thing, is that, he didn't even speak about this as a philosophy. This was just who he was. And he saw people as big, right? And as a result, he raised people up. And, I think we go through this life in a leadership role and we see people as broken, small. They need us. They don't know what they don't. My dad saw people as capable, saw people as big, saw them as beautiful. And so that's all they ever got to be in his presence. And, Jason was there last week. My dad in the last year and a half, he suffered from the middle to late stages of Alzheimer's, and lost his wife 18 months ago of 49 years, lost his house, his ability to drive, lost his mind. In the most, the greatest poetic injustice, he lost his capacity for the very language that he spent his life mastering. Just really, really painful to watch. But somehow, through all of that, he was still able to find the good in people, gratitude in people, and as a result, still called, especially the three of us kids, my brother and sister and I, to a higher good. We found depths of compassion and love for him and each other that we didn't know we had. And right to the end, my dad was calling people forth. And, he passed away. It was his funeral last Saturday. And I gave his eulogy, and we came around and had a banger of a party for him. Had music and fiddler and everything else. But people told stories about the man. And every story sounded the same. He was funny, he was witty, he was brilliant. He was these things, but every story had the same fundamental line at the end, which was how good he made people feel about themselves. And the thing about Dad was, it wasn't just his goodness that shined through. It was the fact that he saw the best in you, and so that's all you ever got to be in his presence.
Could a safety professional exist, thrive, help? Is that possible for somebody that's in safety?
It's possible for all of us.
Yes.
Not just possible. I don't know what other calling would matter in this life. What are you doing that's more important than how you leave people and how you leave them in a... What did my dad do? He sent them home better than he found them. every day.
So instead of somebody being the safety cop, which we all should dread, to be the person that when they encounter the people, yeah, they'll address what's there. But by and large, they're looking at that person as a person. I heard one CEO say that he went to a wedding once and he realized, hey, that's somebody's son and daughter getting married up there. And he said, all of a sudden, I looked at my employees as, that's somebody's son. That's somebody's daughter. How do I want my son? How do I want my daughter treated? And it changed his perspective of how I looked at things.
That's beautiful.
And your dad had a perspective. And look at how the lives, it's probably hard to measure. Who knows how he affected lives? And trickled that down, Keith, to other people and their children. And all.
Yeah, and I'd be really careful of the word trickle there, because that sounds like it's a diminishing stream, and in fact, what it is it's exponential. You're talking about. I mean, the influence that we have on people, it has an exponential power. It's not a trickle down experience.
Fair.
Because how somebody leaves from work directly affects how they behave in traffic, how they show up at when they stop and grab something on the way home from work and treat the clerk at the gas station, how they walk through their front door. So this isn't, just be careful of the idea. The word trickle suggests that it's a small, this thing is a tidal wave that we're creating of energy and momentum in the way that we ultimately do leave people feeling, not how we try to make them feel, but how we do leave them feeling, it's waves that reach far across the world. And so that's why, like, the idea when we talk about like changing the world, and people think that it's, maybe an overly, aspirational or unrealistic concept. Like, there's not a day goes by that everybody isn't changing the world. Not a day. There's not a moment. Now, look, I'm not expecting everyone to think of life that way all the time. We get caught up in our stuff, but just like rationally realizing that is truly what's happening, day in and day out in every single interaction.
Keith, there was a opportunity, I think it's already been almost a year ago now, where you were able to actually interview Simon Sinek. So brilliant speaker, author, thinker. And the interview was around just cause.
Yeah.
And I want you to, if you could, share a little bit about, and this brings us back to the physiology of listening.
Nice work, Jason.
Because if you take a look at your dad, brilliant communicator, right, master of the English language, I would imagine he was also a brilliant listener.
Very thoughtful listener.
Very thoughtful listener. Thank you for that. So tell us a little bit about the just cause, and then maybe your just cause, and then how that relates, let's say, to the physiology of listening.
Just to take a moment, like, what a beautiful tie back, by the way, to capture that and to demonstrate in it your own capacity to listen all the way to the end of the sentence, to the moment, without thinking about where to go next, but just allowing that to feed the non-conscious and help you identify where to go next, right? So you've just demonstrated beautifully what influential listening sounds like, looks like. Acknowledging the stories, tying the pieces together, and then asking for the next layer in the application, in the thread. And like, what an honor that is for me to be listened to that way. There was a study done years ago. I took this holistic class when I was in Australia, my brief stint in college. Not my finest academic endeavor, but and I remember her. She said that, it was like a series of interviews done on people's deathbeds, and it was like, what was the one thing that you wish had happened in your life? And they said, I wish that I had been heard. Like, it's such a beautiful gift to give someone that experience of being heard. And just so rare that people actually get to experience that fully. And so thank you, because I'm getting to experience it right now. And and it's deeply meaningful. And so, the idea of a just cause, that's the tie back to like changing the world. I mean, that's what Cynic's whole premise is that a just cause is this vision, this belief, this mission that's so great it can never be accomplished, right? Just cause that he cites was Martin Luther King's "I have a dream," right? Like that. I mean, it's this concept there is no end game in sight. That's why he calls it the infinite game, because we play a whole series of finite games where we have years with goals and budgets and zero deaths and preventable injury, and those are all finite games. They're measurable. They have an end. An infinite game is this idea of having a just cause that's so big that there'll never be a realization of it, but it's worth it, right? It's worth spending your life or your life's work striving towards. And yeah, I mean, interviewing him was an extraordinary experience. We got to do it in the LA Coliseum. It was like 3,500 people in the audience. It was just a beautiful moment. And he was, by the way, he was the first person who introduced me to the idea of having no preset questions or discussions or anything else. He said, I want this conversation to be organic and the audience just gets to listen in. And that's exactly what we've done here today. And not that you didn't have your list of questions, but the conversation has been obviously quite organic. And again, only made better by the way in which both of you listen and how deeply you listen and then ask that follow-up question. And, part of that, so my just cause, which I got to share with them, was the desire to usher in a world in which when we ask, how are you, we really ask. And when the person answers, we really listen. And so, this idea of the physiology of listening is the idea that, physically, there's an art to how we listen and a science to how we listen. And so it can start with just the intentionality of literally, under the table or whatever, pointing our feet in the direction of that person. There's a big story to be told that, where your feet go is where your focus goes. And the fact that by the way, sales professionals or anybody in a conversation, if you want to know if somebody's interested in what you have to say, just look at their feet, because their feet are telling you quite a story if they're trying to dip out and be gone or not. And it's a pretty fascinating experience. But anyway, you can direct your feet, you direct your body, you listen with your whole body, right? And of course, the mind is translating the story the body's telling it. We already covered that. So just by leaning in, showing them genuine interest, the mind starts to translate that as recognizing genuine interest. Now, the thing we have to understand about how we communicate is that everything we ever learned about communication was designed from a place of getting us something. Okay, so, when we first were born, we had one mode of communication. It was to what? Cry. And we cried when we wanted something, when we wanted to be picked up, put down, attention, exactly, right? The massive list. And something amazing happens in the first 18 months of the baby's life. Every time that baby cries, in the mother, oxytocin, the love hormone, is released and fills her with an overwhelming sense to go fix that cry. Okay, it's a really beautiful evolutionary pattern. So 18 months, that baby cries, oxytocin, oh my God. In fact, mothers even start to interpret the different cries to know what they mean. It's really beautiful. And something happens at about 18 months old, that shit dries up. All right, there's no oxytocin left. And the baby goes to cry and say that one thing and want that, and that's the moment the mother looks at it, goes, okay, knock it off and use your words, right? And that's right around the time we start developing language. And over the next 6.5 years, that's when the 80 to 90% of our personality gets fully formed. Our character gets fully formed. And that's when we learn how to use communication to get what we want. And so we learn our personality. We learn that if I'm polite, I get what I want. If I'm funny, I get what I want. If I'm, that if I'm obstinate, if I get left alone, if I'm, a bully, I can get what I want. And we become the person we become, which to the parents out there, if you have an 8-year-old or older that sucks, you're just going to have to make a new one if you're not happy with that version. Because there's basically no shifting at that point. But, ultimately, everything in our listening is designed to get us something. And our communication is designed to get us something. And the premise of shifting this is to learn to be generous in how we listen. And so we can shift the body to listen, to become aware of our facial reactions and expressions and how those things tend to dictate, when we're in judgment, when we're in, we tend to impact what people are willing to tell us, how they speak to us, what they say next. But there's also how we train the mind to listen. And when we're listening from a place of, is this interesting? Does this matter to me? Am I getting anything? I'm bored, whatever. That's again about what we're receiving. But what we can do is we can shift and think to ourselves, like, what value can I bring to this person? How can I honor this person? How can I serve this person? What does this person need from me? What does this person really want me to understand right now? And as we start to ask those questions, of course, what we're doing is we're also shifting the reticular activating system in the brain to listen differently. You said that the sweetest sound from Carnegie is the sound of one's own name, right? Well, we have superpowers in our listening. It's the reason that at a crowded party, you can hear your name mentioned from across the room, even though everything else sounds like a murmur. And so we can train our minds and our bodies to listen fully to people from a place of generosity, from a place of love, from a place of contribution, from a place of curiosity. And when we do that, we transform the listening experience to allow somebody to truly be heard, not just feel heard.
Keith, you have been speaking this whole time messages from your life experiences. You're not talking textbook. You're talking about life experiences, observations, listening to others. As we wrap this up, what encouragement would you give to that person that says, I want to be the right kind of person. I want to be what I need to be so I can do what I need to do. What word of encouragement, just to wrap this up, would you give?
The word of encouragement would be, you're already enough. And that what you do in this life doesn't determine your value and your worth. Okay, but if you want to do more, focus on who you're being. The greatest multiplication of your efforts that you'll ever experience in this life, I believe, I know nothing, I believe, is that internal, that self-work. And the willingness to consistently look inwardly, not from a critical or angry or hostile place. Because remember, that concept of assigning a label to something and all it gets to be, it doesn't just go for people around us, it goes most of all for ourselves. And so when we speak to ourselves, asking that same question, does this way that I'm speaking to and thinking of myself, does it honor and serve me? And if it doesn't, acknowledge it and have the courage to change the conversation.
This time has just been what we said earlier. The person you meet that says, I need to think about this. I need to adjust. I need to consider. And thank you, Keith, for taking your time to come and share with this podcast audience thoughts to make us not just a better safety professional, but to be the person we are in our best. So thank you very much.
Beautifully said. Thank you. You're welcome. It was an honor. Thank you both. Thank you to the whole team, too. The big crew that made this happen and got to meet them. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to My Big Safety Challenge, a podcast produced in partnership by Dale Carnegie and BCSP, with your hosts, Dale Carnegie Master Trainer Merle Heckman, and Jason Coons, Global EHS Team and Culture Activation Lead for 3M. Executive produced by Charlie Eltringham. Supervising producer and editing by Michael Escobedo. Directed by Michael Escobedo, Joel Burgai, and Giachi Liu. Graphics by Giachi Liu. Editorial support from Brendan Mohawk. Consulting producers are Colin Brown and Mark Sullivan. To have new episodes delivered directly to you, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. If you would like to share your story of a safety leadership challenge you faced, email us at info@mybigsafetychallenge.com. See you next time.